Hi everybody, it's Andy, and welcome again to my office in Modesto, California. I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in California as well as New York, and in this video I'm going to try to explain the difference between a guilty plea and a no contest plea in California criminal court. Now, anyone who's ever seen a crime drama on TV, news story, about a trial on TV, for example, you're probably really familiar with the terms guilty plea, not guilty plea, like you've heard them before. On TV shows, for example, not guilty by reason of insanity probably is used more often than it really occurs in real life, for instance. But nevertheless, you've heard of the terms before. I'm going to make a guess here that the news, as well as like drama shows like that, probably don't explain the difference between guilty and no contest, in depth. Hence why this video is coming out. So in California, at least, the governing law here is going to be California Penal Code Section 1016, 1016, particularly 1016 parenthetical 3 or subsection 3. So that's the one that goes over no contest as a plea option. And if you read, parenthetical 3, you'll discover the following about a no contest plea. So in terms of criminal court, regardless of whether or not it's a felony or a misdemeanor, no contest and guilty have the exact same, effect, same significance. If you ever enter a plea of no contest, the judge will most likely then immediately say, and sir, you understand, and ma'am, you understand that a no contest plea and a guilty plea are the same for the purposes of criminal court. So in criminal court, no contest and guilty are the same thing. The benefit of pleading no contest versus guilty actually is in civil court. And it's in civil court for misdemeanor cases only. If you read section 1016, 3, you'll notice that for felonies, no contest and guilty have the same effect. So, if you plead guilty in a felony case, it will most likely be used against you in a civil case arising out of the same facts also. So felony cases, it's the same thing in civil court too. For misdemeanor cases, however, there is an advantage potentially to pleading no contest versus guilty. So in criminal court, like I said, no contest and guilty are the same thing. You plead no contest in a misdemeanor case, that judge, the criminal judge, will interpret that as a guilty plea. However, if you plead no contest in a misdemeanor criminal case, by law, again, section 1016 parenthetical 3, that admission cannot be used against you in a civil case, if there is one, that arises out of the same facts that gave, that resulted in the criminal case in the first place. So the advantage then is if you commit a crime that ends up being a misdemeanor, and let's say that you end up getting charged for that crime, and you also face a civil suit, for example. Let's say the victim sues you for money, for example. If you plead guilty to the misdemeanor offense, the plaintiff, the victim in the civil case, almost certainly will use that against you in the civil case also. So if you, for example, if you've heard of the burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, preponderance of the evidence, and so on, beyond a reasonable doubt is a fairly high bar. So if the guilty plea means that you've already, basically you admit that the evidence clears that bar. If it clears a high bar, it's going to clear a low one also. So if you plead guilty in a misdemeanor case, you go to a civil case, that plaintiff will use, the guilty plea against you, and your ability to defend against a civil case just got a lot more complicated, a lot more difficult. However, let's say that you plead no contest to the criminal case instead, the misdemeanor criminal case instead. For criminal court purposes, it's just the same thing as a guilty plea. However, in civil court, the plaintiff, the victim in my scenario, cannot use that cannot use that no contest plea against you in the civil lawsuit. So that's not to say that the plaintiff in the civil suit can't win. The plaintiff certainly can, depending on the facts of the situation. But the plaintiff just has to do a lot more work to, for example, prove things from scratch instead of just relying on your guilty plea. So that's the advantage. If you are potentially facing a civil suit arising out of the same facts, no contest in a misdemeanor case makes the plaintiff's civil case a lot more difficult, hopefully, for you. So, so that's the advantage. Most of the time, even if there is no civil suit currently, you don't know when a civil suit might arise. So there is the advantage to pleading no contest generally, just in case a civil suit arises later on. Yeah. So anyway, hopefully all that made sense. That's California Penal Code Section 1016, particularly 1016 parenthetical 3 or subsection 3. Again, linked and pasted and all that stuff down below. And yeah, so that's basically it. So go ahead and like, share, comment, subscribe, rewatch this video, leave me a comment, etc. Down below, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks.